Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 11th episode of Dose of Derm, a dermatology guide for medical students. My name is Emma Holjak.
And my name is Iryna Savinova, and on today's episode, we will be interviewing Dr. Valerie Doyon, equal parts caffeine and sunscreen. Dr. Valerie Doyon is a first-year dermatology resident at the University of Montreal. She grew up on Vancouver Island in a French-speaking household and is a former national team karate athlete.
She completed her BSc in French at Ottawa U and her MD degree at UBC, where she was the class president of the Victoria cohort. She interviewed at 8 dermatology programs across the country and successfully matched to Montreal for residency. Without further ado, we are excited to introduce to you Dr. Valerie Doyon.
Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to ask you about all our French questions for the French-speaking programs and just for all the residency programs that you interviewed at. I think that's a special treat to have that opportunity to talk to you about that.
Absolutely.
So, to jump right into our first question, could you tell us a little bit about your medical school experience and your journey to dermatology in general?
Okay, yeah. So I thankfully already knew that I wanted to do dermatology even prior to medical school. I was already kind of thinking that I would apply to dermatology and family medicine and that would be it. And so throughout medical school, I just kind of went through the process of trying to confirm that choice. And I really tried to, give a fair chance to other specialties. And I even did a project in ultrasound, but ultimately nothing really changed. And so that kind of was I think a big advantage because it allowed me to start doing a lot of extracurricular projects related to dermatology early on, and just kind of having that mindset of, knowing that it's a competitive specialty, making sure that I have, I put my best foot forward and I really work in advance towards my applications, I think made a huge difference. Because realistically, like in terms of, for instance, with publications, by the time you start a project to getting it published, it can take a year, even a year and a half. And so because of that delay, if you know in advance and you can get started, it's a big advantage.
That's definitely an important consideration. I think that people underestimate how long it takes to get things rolling. So there's definitely a little buffer period between when you decide that you want to pursue something and you actually start pursuing it. So I think it's actually definitely helpful considering maybe if you would at all be considered interested in dermatology to just start something and then see how it goes.
Yeah, if you're considering a competitive specialty, it's worth, I think it's worth it to start preparing that just in case that you do end up applying, and you can always, not apply in the end. And, it was possible that I could have just in the end, fourth year, changed my mind and only applied to family medicine, but at least I would have been prepared for the more competitive specialty going into CaRMS.
Speaking of some of the things you did during your medical school, I was wondering, is there anything that you think maybe specifically set you out on your resume or CaRMS application that helped with matching, or was it just kind of the whole CV and the total of all that you did, you think?
I think there was two things that helped. So for me, knowing my own strengths, I'm someone who likes to do a lot of extracurricular projects, and that was really where I think I shined in my application, especially since I had the time to really do a bunch of projects. So, although I did a bit of research and a bit of everything, I think just the volume of extracurricular projects I was able to do during my medical school, and that includes my role as class president, which took up quite a bit of my time. I think that made a big difference. And the other thing that I did that which isn't super conventional, but I did my clerkship my third year in a rural longitudinal program. And so, I did general surgery, internal medicine, all the basic things, but over an entire year. And so my preceptors got to know me really well. And over the year, they gave me much more responsibility, to do things on my own. And so I think that translated in better clinical evaluations, which ends up being part of the CaRMS package. And it also just allowed me to have better hands-on skills. I feel very comfortable doing excisions and different, minor procedures and such, because I was given much more clinical responsibility compared to my peers, I think, through that. So that was really nice. Yeah, so I highly recommend if I know there's multiple medical schools that offer this sort of option to do longitudinal learning, especially in clerkship. So I highly recommend that.
That's really cool. I actually just recently heard that about rural like hospitals and doing rotations there, and that it like they really can like you oftentimes are working one-on-one with like a preceptor, so you get to almost learn and do stuff yourself a lot more often. So that is really cool that that was something that you did that helped your application, you think?
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of building off of that, the next question we wanted to talk to you about was your CaRMS application. So since we're in the middle of residency season, we wanted to hear a little bit about what your experience was like applying to residency and going through CaRMS. And could you just talk to us a little bit about the approach you took in terms of preparing your application?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in my year, applications were due early January. And so to be honest, I actually spent almost all of December, almost full time writing my applications because at UBC we actually had kind of a research block during that time, which allowed me to spend most of my time actually towards CARMS. So I won't lie that it actually does take quite a bit of time to put everything together. Like I probably went through at least 10 drafts of my personal letters. I practiced pretty hard for the Casper test as well, which is required by multiple programs, including 2 dermatology programs, if I'm not mistaken. And just, yeah, even just entering all the details of your extracurriculars and your CV into CARMS, even though I don't think they actually read it, it just takes a long time to just enter it in, especially if you're doing it in 2 languages. So for me, I was applying to dermatology in English, dermatology in French, and family medicine in English. So it was basically like 3 separate applications in terms of the volume of work, because each of those required different reference letters, different personal statements, different CVs, etc. So that's something that I want to touch on today, which is when applying to French schools, it's a lot more work, and also the dermatology programs have a separate referee form. So instead of accepting traditional format reference letters, they have a standardized format similar to the family medicine one, and so that's always something to think about, because like for me, I was worried about kind of inconveniencing my referees by asking them to submit a traditional written letter and the form that Quebec required. So I ended up using almost, yeah, so 2 out of my 3 referees for Quebec were actually non-dermatologists, because I had kind of run out of referees, and I just didn't want to, I just wanted to have different ones. But so that's always a big consideration. And the other aspect too with applying in French is the French language requirements. So it slightly varies between the 3 schools. There's Université de Sherbrooke, Université de Laval, and Université de Montréal. They all have slightly different requirements, and some people might be able to, not have to do a test for a certain school versus another. But the main test is called Test de Français International. And so this is like a standardized French test. It has like a listening portion and like a written language comprehension portion. And the thing with this test is that you actually, like, I wish I signed up for this like way in advance, because the test dates aren't available super frequently. They're only available in certain provinces. So like for me, I actually had to travel to Toronto to write it, which was a big ordeal in itself. And then just getting the test results takes 4 to 6 weeks if I'm not mistaken. And so like for me, I didn't even want to start writing my applications in French until I knew that I was eligible to apply. So that was a big factor. So yeah, if someone's considering applying in French, please write the TFE way in advance, to give yourself the time to plan this out. And even if you don't pass it, you can rewrite it in time. You can have a second try at it as well.
So it seems like there's a lot of other considerations to factor into applying to French programs. So for your reference letters, like going back to that, do they accept English written reference letters for the French programs, or do those forms have to be submitted in French?
The forms are available in both languages.
Okay.
So for me, so I had, since I had done my med school at UBC, my referees, like I had a rheumatologist fill one out, and he filled it out in English. But what I did And I don't think this is necessary, but I felt that it would kind of show extra initiative on my side and true, like, dedication and commitment to their program if I actually had them translated professionally. And so CaRMS has a translating service that's kind of built in. However, I heard that it's not, sometimes the quality isn't actually that good. And if you don't meet the deadline, they actually won't guarantee that it'll be translated in time for when the documents are due. So I actually hired like a private translator who did them for me. And so even for my reference letters, because they're not like they're confidential, I didn't actually see the content of my letters, but my referee had to send them to my translator, and the translator uploaded them directly to the CaRMS portal. So it's a lot of extra steps and planning things out, but I think it can be done. And I know for me, having like someone who's really, really solid in French review all of my applications, like not only my reference letters, but my personal statements, my CV in French, making sure that the French was of really, really high quality. I think that was important to show that I was, that really I did want to study in French, and I took it really seriously.
That's definitely, I feel like, very helpful. I didn't even know that that would at all be possible, that having that translator. And I'm not sure, maybe that's a common thing amongst Quebec schools that is well known, but if not, that's definitely a good pearl to share with anyone listening. And something I did want to ask, perhaps maybe if someone is listening and they're feeling hesitant about applying to a French residency program. So you did medical school in an English speaking program. Were you all nervous about applying to residency and not having that, maybe not having that background and being comfortable in speaking in medical terminology within the language, even though you speak it fluently? Like, what were the considerations there? And do you have any encouragement maybe to anyone who's in the same position?
Yeah. So my background, like I'm French first language, but grew up in an Anglophone, area in British Columbia. And so yeah, my medical school is all in English. All of my medical terminology knowledge was in English. And so when I arrived here and started doing residency in French, it was a huge transition. I'll be honest. For the first week or two, I had trouble interpreting a chart, just because there's a lot of acronyms that are used. And so, I understand if they had written out the acronyms, it would be okay. But because, especially in Quebec, or in Montreal anyways, like we use paper charts, so people use a lot of acronyms. And so I would get stuck on those. But that only was really an issue for the first month or two of residency, I would say. And now it's okay. I don't think it's a huge barrier anymore. And in fact, I think that it's an advantage to be able to speak English with some of the patients that come through who are much more comfortable in English. So like in Montreal, we have a lot of immigrants that may be more comfortable in English. And so even though there are English hospitals here, sometimes they still end up in the French hospitals, including the CHIM, which is my main hospital. So that's been helpful.
That's really cool. I guess I never even really thought about that, but I guess you do have that dual skill now, having medical education within two languages fully, which is probably very unique.
Yeah,
Um,
I think most people in Montreal are bilingual, just to varying degrees.
mhm.
But yeah, I guess what I would say, I'm not sure exactly what's the level of French that's required, for applying in French. I've seen like in my experience, there's some residents that, they don't have perfect French whatsoever, and I think it's okay. Especially I think in Montreal, where again, lots of the patients are bilingual, so they understand as well. So yeah, I would encourage people, if they feel comfortable enough to go through the interview, which is only 20 minutes, in French, then give it a shot, because I've really enjoyed my experience at University of Montreal. I think they offer like really great teaching, so it was a great decision.
Now that you mentioned your interviews, we wanted to ask if you could touch a little bit on what the interview process was like. Obviously, bearing in mind that there's definitely confidential portions, but kind of around that aspect, and how you interviewed for 8 programs and what the overlap was like between them.
Mm-hmm. I received much more interviews than I was expecting. So that was a big surprise, but a good surprise, obviously. And so it was busy because I had like 6 interviews for family medicine and then 8 dermatology interviews kind of interspersed. So I had about 1 a day. So I was quite busy, but with the virtual interviews, it's okay because they're short and it's just, you get in the rhythm after the second or third interview. You just kind of, you have your pre-interview routine and you just, rinse and repeat. I find that for dermatology interviews, it was a lot of just curveball questions, like really, really sometimes like rapid fire, but just, not your standard interview questions in my experience. Just being prepared for absolutely anything and everything is the best advice I can give, bearing confidentiality, things. Yeah.
That's great advice. Thank you. We're actually kind of building off of that. The next thing we wanted to talk to you about was the concept of parallel planning. So you mentioned that you applied to both dermatology and family medicine and had interviews in both. I was wondering, since this is something that a lot of students consider, if you would kind of mind sharing your approach to deciding to parallel plan and how it was for you applying to both programs at the same time.
Absolutely. So in deciding whether to parallel plan when, applying to a competitive specialty, I highly recommend that everyone parallel plans with something that's less competitive. The exception to that would be if you're comfortable going through the second iteration or taking a gap year. But I find that both of those were quite risky. Some people will plan to go into the second iteration and apply to something where there's almost always leftover spots, such as family medicine or pathology. But the thing that people seem to not consider so much is that you only have about a week to put those applications together to get your reference letters. Like, it's a very, very stressful week, and you're already, I assume that people would be really disappointed hearing their match result and then having to kind of, put a whole new application together in a week. So for me, that I was really, not willing to go through that process myself. And so I highly recommend people back up. And I find honestly that for family medicine, it wasn't very difficult to do so. I basically had 2 different CVs and I deleted most of my dermatology activities off of my family medicine CVs. And there was some activities that I only listed on my family medicine CV. And so generally I found that it wasn't very difficult to apply to both. And I didn't receive any questions related to, dermatology or this perceived interest in family medicine interviews. So that wasn't really an issue. And the other point is that it's just nice to have extra interviews. So I made sure that my first interview was a family medicine interview just to make sure that, iron out the kinks going into the interviews that I was prioritizing.
I did want to ask, did you find that because you had probably very strong experiences in dermatology, deleting those off the family CV would kind of weaken your strength as an applicant overall? I know there's kind of that balancing of not wanting to come across too interested in this one specialty. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know. I don't think that, like, personally, I think I still had enough extracurriculars that weren't related to dermatology that I could put on my CV, and I still had enough for a 3-page family medicine CV, which is plenty. And some programs like the UBC family medicine program doesn't even require a CV. It doesn't even look at a CV if you submit one. So I think that it was fine. I think the family medicine programs are looking for other attributes, and they care much less about, publications or things like that, dermatology programs might value more.
That makes sense. And just out of curiosity, I don't know if you kind of plan that far with family, like medicine specifically, but were you planning on kind of bridging back and doing like maybe a more like derm heavy practice, or were there just aspects of general family medicine that you enjoyed and could kind of see yourself doing in the future?
Personally, I've always been very into dermatology, and I think I would have found a way to do a lot of dermatology things through family medicine, especially in more like in rural places or places where there isn't dermatology. I think there's more opportunity to do so. Or another way is, had I gone into family medicine, I would have probably tried to join, to join a clinic with a dermatologist so I could work, under them in a way, or just, have extra support, just to make sure that, I could see, general skin conditions, but, have that backup support from a dermatology expert if I needed. That's what I think I would have done. But thankfully things worked out. But it is just a very competitive specialty, and you really have to be ready for the alternative, that things don't work out, and you have to be ready and accepting, and have a backup plan that you would be happy with.
I think that's a very helpful take, and I like that it's super grounded and very realistic, because I think that maybe putting your eggs all in one basket is what makes things so intimidating. So I like hearing that there's different options. So we did want to ask you about your dermatology program, or the dermatology program at the University of Montreal, and maybe something unique that you've discovered in starting the program, or what your experience has been like overall.
Yeah, I'd love to. So bearing in mind that I'm just in R1, and so I haven't really experienced what it's typically like to be a dermatology resident at University of Montreal, because I only did one block, and so we're off service for the entire first year, like, other than one block. But what I've noticed so far is that it seems like the staff are very, very focused on teaching, and so that's been really nice. Like, they've really put in a lot of time into teaching us, and so that's been like the just educational value has been really great. We have 2 half days a week dedicated to teaching in some way, shape, or form, which is amazing. And the other thing that surprised me about residency in Quebec was that I find that the call schedules are much more humane. So there isn't those 24, 26-hour call shifts. Those don't exist in Quebec. The Quebec residents have a really strong union that basically says that you can't work more than 16 hours in a row. So the longest that I'll typically work on call is 13 hours, which is really good compared to most residents in Canada. So that's been really nice, and has kept me a little bit more sane throughout first year residency.
That's really cool. I didn't know that about the call schedule. And I think that makes so much sense that, like, residents are, there's a cap, still a huge cap, but much more reasonable, I would say, than those really long shifts. So that's great to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And then something else we wanted to speak to you a little bit about is if you had any advice for dermatology electives. A lot of our listeners are probably preparing to take that on, if not this year, then next year or sometime soon. So do you have any advice of maybe things you did that helped you stand out or make a good impression on the team when you were working with them?
Yeah. I think as a medical student rotating in dermatology, you have to just kind of keep in mind that, like, dermatology appointments are very, very fast. It's a very busy clinic. And so you just, you're trying to be there and be helpful and not kind of inconvenience the team by, your presence or whatnot. Like, you have to kind of balance it out with, of course, like, you're there to learn and stuff, but if you can be there but also be helpful, I think that makes a big difference, and it makes that preceptors are much more likely to invite you to their clinic. So, like, for instance, for me, I kind of made sure that I had really good surgical skills. And so once my preceptors kind of figured out that I was able to do excisions and biopsies on my own, they kind of just, would give me the other room and let me go ahead, to the point where one of my preceptors actually booked extra clinics, extra patients, and kind of double booked himself so that I could just work and do all the excisions in one room, and then he could continue and see patients, and not really have to supervise me much at all. So that's just an example of a way that I think med students can help make themselves stand out. And even if it's just like, oh, you're doing a biopsy, well, for you to have the initiative to go in and grab all the tools that are going to be needed to start filling out the pathology request form, or even like writing prescriptions, not signing them, of course, but just preparing things, I think is really helpful to keep the clinic moving. And that also, I find, allows for, if the preceptor is not running, an hour late, then they're going to be much more likely to be able to teach you and to take that time to give you a better experience.
Those are some really great considerations, and I have a feeling that that preceptor probably loved having you around and misses all the work that you probably did once you're gone,
Yeah.
or I guess the work that you couldn't do once you're gone.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get into the last part of the podcast with the rapid fire questions, we wanted to ask whether you had any final piece of advice that you wanted to leave off the episode on. It could be about CaRMS, it could be about medical school in general, really anything.
One piece of advice I don't hear frequently is that I think that it's important to really spend a lot of time on your applications in a very meticulous way to make sure that it is, that there's no typos in there and that everything is nicely laid out and presented. Because one of the things that I think programs are looking for in a dermatology resident is being detail oriented. And so one way that you can demonstrate that is in your application. So for me, like I, made sure that my CV was like very, just really nicely laid out, very clear font, like formatted in a very nice way. And like in the same way, I made sure that my personal letters were of really good quality in the writing and, had been proofread multiple times, etc. So I think that it's just one final way for people to really differentiate themselves in the process.
That's a great piece of advice. And I think something that everyone can do, which is nice as well, to just make sure you book yourself that time so you can really go over your applications and get it in perfect condition to get it submitted.
Mm-hmm. I had literally spotted a typo the morning before applications were due, and I kind of freaked out. So that like that's an example of like how meticulous I was about the whole process. But at the same time, I do want to mention that the CaRMS portal seems to kind of shut down and just kind of bug 2 to 3 days before the submission deadline almost every year. And so that was really stressful for me because I hadn't finished my applications at that time and I was just kind of locked out of CaRMS. So if people have, everything in there, at least just even if it's like a preliminary version, just in case the portal goes down because everyone's, all 2,000 medical students are in there submitting all their things, that'll reduce the pre-CaRMS anxiety quite a bit.
That's a great point.
Okay, so moving on to our final section or component of the podcast, we're going to ask you some rapid fire questions to allow our viewers to get to know you a little bit outside of medicine. And so we have to start with our first classic question, which is, what is your favorite skincare product?
Oh, I'm a big fan of Aquaphor. It's like petroleum jelly, but better. And so it's just such a versatile product. You can put it, I put it on my nails, on my lips, on, if my skin's irritated, it's great. On wounds, great product.
I was just gonna say, I didn't realize how much dermatologists like petroleum jelly until doing a few rotations, and it was just like on any wound, it's just slap it on there, I feel like if I just offered petroleum jelly, it'd be the right answer, even if I didn't know the context.
Yeah.
Okay. So our next question is, what is your favorite type of food, or do you have maybe a favorite restaurant in Montreal?
Oh, I haven't explored the food scene too much yet, so I can't pronounce myself on Montreal restaurants, but I'm a big fan of Thai food or like Asian food in general. And so I before starting residency, I was traveling for 2 months and I spent 3 weeks in Thailand and just ate so much food. It was amazing.
Oh, wow. I hear that the amount of fruits that they have over there, like just hundreds that have never been seen, like within America. Like, did you get to try any of the cool fruits?
Oh yeah. They've got this like really smelly one that
Oh,
they
durian,
yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
The other ones aren't coming to the top of my head right now. Yes, I mean, I ate so many weird things when I was over there. Like I ate like a scorpion tail. I ate like, gosh, like fish testicles by accident. I didn't know. What else? I think I ate alligator, all sorts of bugs. It was great. Yeah.
That sounds really cool. And I know that the durian specifically has a very pungent smell, but I've tried a bit and it has such an interesting texture that I could definitely see why it's so popular over there.
Yeah, but you just can't bring it into any sort of hotel rooms or anything. They'll kick you out.
Okay, good to know.
And then for our final question, this one's a little bit out there, so if you need a second to think about your answer, no worries. But we were wondering if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
I would love to, oh yeah, I think I would love to be able to fly, because then you could kind of like bird's eye view see everything. I think this is like the like visual thing with derm again, but like I just really like to have like a really good field of view to be able to see everything. And I think from a plane or up higher is a good way to explore a new city and yeah, see the horizons.
That's a cool answer. I like how it all ties back into derm. It's almost as if these are like sample CaRMS answers. Just kidding, they're not, but still, you
Yeah.
did a great job.
Thanks.
Okay, well, on that note, I wanted to say a huge thank you to Dr. Valerie Doyon. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here and speak with us and just join us in your busy schedule. And to all our listeners, thank you so much for listening. We hope this episode gave you some more insight into the entire CaRMS application process and maybe a little bit of reassurance during this time. If you want to keep up with our podcast, offer any feedback, or know when we post our episodes, you can follow us on Instagram or Twitter at Skin Curriculum, or visit our website at www.skincurriculum.com. Otherwise, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Dose of Derm, and we hope you all take care.